A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. You know what I find fascinating? International relationships that look completely contradictory from the outside. Like, how do you maintain a strong partnership with someone who's also hanging out with the people who want you gone?
Oh, you're talking about the Israel-China dynamic. It's one of the most strategically schizophrenic relationships in modern geopolitics. And today's prompt from Daniel is right in that wheelhouse, asking about the history and nuances of that bilateral tie, especially with China's alignment with the so-called axis of resistance.
It's a classic case of don't ask, don't tell on a geopolitical scale. And Herman, before we dive in, fun fact for our listeners, today's script is being powered by Xiaomi MiMo V2 Pro. So, if we suddenly start speaking in perfect Mandarin, you'll know why.
Ha, noted. And you know, that little factoid actually ties into our topic in a meta way. We're using a Chinese-developed AI to analyze a complex relationship with China. It's a tiny, benign example of the kind of deep, quiet integration we're about to discuss.
Whoa, that's a bit recursive. But you're right. Okay, let's unpack this. The fundamental contradiction is this. Israel has serious, legitimate security concerns about China's deepening strategic partnerships with Iran and its proxies. Yet, at the same time, Israel is increasingly turning to Chinese manufacturing and supply chains to solve its crippling cost of living crisis. It's a strategic paradox.
And it's not a new thing. This goes back decades. But the tension is getting sharper. We're in March 2026, and just in the last few months, we've seen reports of China and Iran conducting joint naval exercises in the Gulf of Oman. Meanwhile, Israeli import data from the first quarter of this year suggests a continued, even accelerated, pivot towards Chinese suppliers for everything from construction materials to electric vehicle components. It's like watching someone strengthen ties with a rival's best friend while simultaneously relying on them for groceries.
That analogy is a bit too on the nose. But you're right. To understand how we got here, you have to go back to 1992, when relations were formally normalized. From the very beginning, it wasn't just about trade. There was a significant, if often quiet, technology transfer component. Israel had niche, advanced military and agricultural tech. China had a massive market and a hunger for modernization. It was a pragmatic match.
A match made in the quiet back rooms of defense ministries, not the bright lights of trade fairs. And that dual-use technology concern has been a shadow over the relationship from day one. The U.S. has always been nervously watching what gets shared. Take the infamous Falcon incident in the early 2000s. Israel was set to sell China a sophisticated airborne early warning system, a game changer for surveillance. The U.S. applied immense pressure and killed the deal, sending a shockwave through the Israeli defense establishment. It was a stark lesson in the limits of this partnership.
So the US has been the third, very powerful party in this room from the start. That sets the stage. And that brings us to the current security architecture, or the cracks in it. The prime example is the Haifa port. In 2021, the Shanghai International Port Group began operating the new Haifa port terminal under a 25-year concession. This is a deep-water port, a critical strategic asset for the Israeli Navy, which often hosts U.S. Sixth Fleet vessels.
So you have a major Chinese state-owned company running a key piece of Israeli infrastructure right next to where American and Israeli warships dock. What could possibly go wrong? The concerns are very specific. It's not about the port workers stealing secrets. It's about the potential for signals intelligence collection, mapping of naval movements, and the creation of a dual-use facility that could theoretically be leveraged in a crisis. Think about the logistics. The company controls the cranes, the scheduling software, the port management systems. In a worst-case scenario, could port operations be subtly disrupted to hamper naval deployments? The Israeli security establishment was divided on this. The economic ministry saw a modern, efficient port built with foreign investment a boon for trade. The security services saw a potential listening post and a choke point.
And that's the strategic schizophrenia in a nutshell. One part of the government is waving red flags, the other part is cutting ribbons. But Herman, you mentioned China's alignment with the axis of resistance. How does that fit? Because China isn't just doing business with Israel. It's signing massive, long-term strategic pacts with Iran.
This is the core of the challenge. In March 2021, China and Iran signed a 25-year cooperation agreement, a framework for $400 billion in Chinese investment in Iranian energy and infrastructure. This isn't just trade, it's a strategic alignment. It gives Tehran a powerful economic lifeline and diplomatic cover, directly undermining the sanctions regime that Israel and the U.S. have relied on to constrain Iran's nuclear and regional ambitions.
So while Israel is worrying about the Haifa port, China is helping to build Iran's economic resilience. It's playing both sides with a level of audacity that's almost impressive. But why? What's China's grand strategy here? It can't just be about annoying Israel.
It's not about Israel at all, really. That's the key misconception. China's engagement with the axis of resistance Iran, Syria, Hezbollah is part of its broader multipolar strategy. It's about challenging U.S. hegemony in the Middle East, securing energy resources, and building a network of partnerships that are not aligned with Washington. Israel is, in this calculus, a useful economic partner, a source of innovation, but ultimately a U.S. ally. China is hedging its bets, building influence with every major player in the region, regardless of their stance toward each other. It's a masterclass in non-alignment that actually aligns with everyone.
So Israel is just a line item in China's much larger regional spreadsheet. That's humbling and a bit terrifying. Because from Jerusalem's perspective, that Chinese naval visit to Haifa in 2025, happening while Beijing is conducting exercises with Tehran, sends a very clear message. Our partnership has limits, and those limits are defined by our broader interests.
Precisely. And those broader interests now include a direct challenge to the U.S.-led technology order. Remember those U.S. export controls on advanced semiconductors that went into effect in January 2025. They were aimed at curbing China's AI and military advancement. For Israeli tech companies, which are deeply integrated with U.S. supply chains, this created a sudden disruption. A startup designing a new smart irrigation sensor might suddenly find its preferred American chip unavailable or twice the price.
And here's where the cost of living crisis kicks in. Israel has one of the highest costs of living in the OECD. Housing costs were up 12% year over year by late 2025. Inflation hit 5.2%. For businesses, especially in tech, margins are everything. When the US tightened the screws on semiconductor exports, Israeli companies didn't just sit there. They looked for alternatives. And who was waiting with open arms? Chinese suppliers.
Exactly the dynamic. Companies like Huawei Semiconductor Division, or SMIC, despite being under U.S. sanctions themselves, offered chips that were good enough, and crucially, cheaper and available. We've been seeing Israeli firms in IoT, automotive tech, and consumer electronics quietly redesigning products to accommodate Chinese chips. It's a pragmatic survival move. I spoke to one founder who told me, "My investors care about burn rate and time to market, not the geopolitical provenance of my microcontroller."
So, on one hand, you have the Israeli National Security Council warning about Chinese infiltration and dependency. On the other hand, you have the Ministry of Economy and the tech sector saying, we need affordable components to stay competitive and to keep consumer prices from skyrocketing. The government is essentially at war with itself over this. It's not just different ministries, it's different worldviews.
And the numbers tell the story of which side is winning, at least economically. Bilateral trade between Israel and China reached $25.4 billion in 2024, a 15% increase from the previous year. That growth trajectory is steep. Compare that to trade with the European Union, which is larger in absolute terms but growing much more slowly. The economic pull is undeniable, and it's not just goods. Chinese venture capital, though quieter now than a decade ago, still finds its way into Israeli tech incubators.
It's a powerful addiction. Cheap, reliable manufacturing solves immediate pain points. But what's the long-term strategic cost? You mentioned the U.S. watching nervously. There's got to be a point where Washington says, enough. You can't have our advanced defense technology and also be building up the supply chains of our primary strategic competitor.
That's the looming flashpoint. The U.S. Israel relationship is the cornerstone of Israeli security, underpinned by billions in annual military aid and deep intelligence cooperation. If deepening economic ties with China are perceived to compromise that, the blowback could be severe. We're already seeing hints of it in intelligence, sharing protocols becoming more restrictive. Certain U.S. agencies are compartmentalizing information more tightly when it comes to projects with potential Chinese supply chain exposure. The second order effect is that Israel's traditional Western alliances could fray if it's seen as playing a double game.
So what's the end game here? Can this contradictory state persist? It feels inherently unstable, like a spinning plate that's starting to wobble.
It can persist only under very specific conditions. 1. China moderates its engagement with Iran and Hezbollah to a level that doesn't trigger an outright security crisis for Israel, maybe keeping it to economic rather than advanced military cooperation. 2. Israel manages to diversify its supply chains enough that it's not wholly dependent on China, giving it more negotiating leverage. And 3. The U.S. tolerates a certain level of Sino-Israeli economic engagement, as long as it doesn't touch critical defense technology or violate its sanctions regimes.
That's a lot of ifs, and the first one seems particularly unlikely given China's strategic commitment to Iran. So for our listeners, especially those in business or policy, what are the practical takeaways? What should they be watching?
First, for Israeli businesses or anyone in complex supply chains, diversification isn't just a buzzword. You must account for geopolitical risk premiums. Building a sole source dependency on Chinese suppliers is a massive vulnerability. The smart move is a China plus one strategy, even if it costs more in the short term. Look at Vietnam, India, Eastern Europe. It's about resilience.
Second, monitor the specific indicators. Don't just read headlines about summits. Watch the concrete data. Israeli import-export figures with China quarter by quarter. Track Chinese naval movements in the Eastern Mediterranean. Follow the U.S.-China tech competition updates, especially around semiconductor controls. Those are the pressure points. Also, watch for any new Israeli legislation on foreign investment screening. It's a barometer of how seriously the security concerns are being taken.
And finally, understand that this isn't a binary choice. It's a spectrum of managed tension. The relationship will likely continue with this underlying contradiction. Public security warnings coupled with booming private trade until a crisis forces a reckoning. The big unknown is what that crisis might be. A major flare-up with Hezbollah using Chinese-supplied components? A Taiwan contingency that forces Israel to choose sides?
That Taiwan scenario is the real nightmare. If China moves on Taiwan and the U.S. responds with full-spectrum sanctions, Israel would be under immense pressure to join. Abandoning Chinese supply chains overnight would be economically devastating. Factories would halt, prices would spike. It's the ultimate vulnerability created by this dependency. It's the bill Herman mentioned, coming due all at once.
Which is why the current path, while pragmatic in the short term, is building up significant strategic debt. The bill will come due eventually. The question is whether Israel can build up enough of a buffer economic and strategic to pay it without catastrophic consequences.
Well, on that cheerful and fiscally responsible note, thanks as always to our producer Hilbert Flumingtop. Big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power our little geopolitical analysis sessions. This has been my Weird Prompts. If you're enjoying the show, a quick review on your podcast app helps us reach new listeners who like diving deep into complex topics. We'll see you next time.
Bye for now, and maybe check where your phone was assembled.
This episode was produced using Xiaomi Mimo V2 Pro. Text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, my weird prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts, that's the flows from sloth.